I feel like I could buy a small island in the Caribbean with the amount of money that I spent on acid reflux formulas when I lost my voice for 8 years and 23 different doctors couldn't help me get that back. So why does it have to be so annoying? Why are there so many formulas that are like, oh man, this helped improve my heartburn for about 30 minutes or so, but now my reflux is back and my ears are purple? Or why does every single review say, oh, this really cured my heartburn, and somebody else says this did nothing or it made me totally worse? Well, in this video, you're going to understand why these things are. You're going to understand the best supplements that really can help correct the underlying cause of acid reflux. You're going to understand the worst formulas to use, and some of these things can actually prolong your reflux for as long as you're using these reflux supplements. So I'm not going to go over specific brands. I just don't want phone calls from people like, hey, my formula done help Hank fix his reflux for good. And as happy as I am for Hank, I just don't want to get those calls. So I'm going to help you understand ingredients to look for, understand what they're trying to do with these ingredients, why they can help somebody improve their heartburn, maybe if the person is just on the fence, but how some of these ingredients can just make things worse. So let's jump over to the smartboard and help you understand things that can really help fix what you're trying to fix and things that can make everything a whole lot worse. So I feel like it's important for me to share that with none of the 23 doctors that I was working with when I was trying to fix my reflux issues and get my voice back, none of them told me that these things were just covering up the symptoms. I thought that this is what you did to fix the problem. So in this video, I want to make sure that you guys understand why some of the formulas can relieve some symptoms temporarily, why some of them might fix the underlying cause for some folks and will do nothing for others, and then I'll share the supplements that we've been seeing amazing results with for acid reflux with thousands of people for 20 years now. So when we're looking at these acid reflux formulas, it's important to understand that there's basically going to be different categories of what they're trying to do, and the majority of them are acid reducing formulas. So for us to understand why that might not always be a good idea, we want to look at some of these studies that are in the medical literature that explain to us that when we turn off stomach acid, some trouble's going to come. Mother Nature's not such an idiot. There's a reason that there's stomach acid going on. And we look at these studies like the duration of proton pump inhibitor therapy and the risk of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, and that's where there's an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine where we really shouldn't have bacteria. We should just have good bacteria in the large intestine. It really shouldn't have a whole lot in the small intestine or in that stomach area. And we see a systemic review, the use of proton and pump inhibitors, and increased susceptibility to enteric infections. Because basically when we turn off the stomach acid, we're just opening the front door. That stomach acid is not just there so that we can break down our food and get the nutrients out of that food that allows us to rebuild the body and repair things, which is why we see a lot of these studies like proton pump inhibitors and bone health, and we hear of a lot of associations between osteoporosis and prolonged use of proton pump inhibitors, because we're turning off our ability to access the nutrients in the food that we're eating. Now, I'm not going to dig too far into all these studies here. At the end of this video, I'll point you to another video where I help people troubleshoot why they haven't been able to fix their acid reflux or why it keeps coming back. And I dig into a lot of these studies a lot more in there. This is really about the supplements. I just want to make sure that you guys know that there's information in the medical literature that explains to us troubles that come about when we turn off our ability to digest our food. And that stomach acid is a big part of that. So I'll have the links to all of those studies in the description below, and you can dig into those a little bit more, or you can watch this other video that I'll point you to where I talk about them a little bit more. But when we look at these acid reducing formulas, that's what most acid reflux, when you just go to Amazon or you go to your health food store and you look for an acid reflux formula, most of them are going to contain calcium carbonate. So when we look at this formula that claims to improve acid reflux, we see the main ingredients is calcium from calcium carbonate and a little bit of magnesium and some things to flavor it up real nice. So calcium carbonate is pretty much the most alkaline mineral that there is on the planet. And when we look at antacids, when you just buy an antacid at the pharmacy, you turn it around and you see, oh, that's calcium carbonate, because that will neutralize the acid in the stomach, and now there's no more acid to come back up and burn us, so we remove that heartburn symptom. The problem is The body knows about all of those studies that we just pointed out. The body's not as stupid as we are. It knows that that stomach acid is very important for its survival. So it fights to make it happen even when we're trying to turn it off. So that's why most of these types of supplements will just give some type of temporary relief and create a lot of long-term problems. One of the biggest problems is just leaving the front door open, and now things like H. pylori and all these SIBO type issues can come in and set up camp. And if you haven't been hearing about all the troubles that can come from some type of overgrowth in the digestive tract, you're going to want to open your eyes to that. The problems are significant and they are life-altering. So we really don't want to leave the front door open. Leaving the front door open is a problem. The bad guys come in, they set up camp here in the stomach, they have a keg party, they raise their kids, and then they move down here in the small intestine and create all kinds of havoc there. And when we look at this study, they help us understand that this lower esophageal sphincter here, or LES valve at the bottom of the esophagus, can become weak and won't close correctly when something like stress downregulates our stomach acid production. Stress can turn off our ability to create enough stomach acid. It's triggered to close by this stomach being acidic. And if there's not enough acid in that stomach, you can't really tighten that valve so it closes correctly and things move back up. So what we find is that most acid reflux cases are actually caused by a lack of stomach acid, not too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. And with most of our clients, when we increase this stomach acid, now that allows this valve to be triggered to close, and then the acid doesn't come back up and burn them anymore. So when we're using something to turn off that acid, we're just prolonging the life of this reflux by keeping this stomach too alkaline to trigger this LES valve to work the right way. Now, if someone is willing to put zero effort into their health, then using some type of PPI medication or some type of antacid to turn off that acid so the acid doesn't come up and create all that damage, maybe that's their only option. If they're, hey, I'm going to put in no effort. I can take this pill. That's about as much effort as I'm going to put in. Maybe that's the only thing they can do. But if they really want to fix the underlying cause, that ain't going to do it. So if someone's using a PPI or some type of antacid because their doctor told them to do that, I'm not telling you not to do that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving you any type of medical advice. I'm basically just a professional stand-up comic turned nutrition author, because when those 23 different doctors couldn't help me get my voice back, I had to dig for my own answers. And now I take what I've learned and I help health professionals in more than 40 countries for 20 years now learn how to help their clients fix the actual underlying causes of problems instead of just covering up the symptoms. So I'm not telling you to stop using those. Even if I have a client that's using some type of calcium carbonate acid reflux formula, I just tell them, hey, maybe you just set that in your trash to see what it looks like there. If it looks okay, maybe you just leave it there. So when we're looking at ingredients that contain calcium carbonate, you know that you're just using an antacid, even if they're marketing as, oh, it's a natural way to fix reflux. You're still just turning off stomach acid and restricting the body from functioning the way that it's supposed to. The next category of supplements are going to be these mucinogenous type situations where they're just trying to create this, kind of barrier. And we're just going to put this coating around your stomach and around your esophagus so when acid comes there, it's not going to damage it. And that's going to be things like DGL or maybe even aloe vera juice or slippery elm. And I used all these things. That's what I thought was the right thing to do. But I didn't see any improvement because even when you're coating this acid, if you can do it long enough to really coat it, there's enzymes in the stomach that come up and still create damage to the esophagus or even your vocal cords and such, because those enzymes are made to break down protein. So they come back up and they create trouble because we haven't fixed the problem. We haven't shut the front door. We're just trying to cool it all down. It's like if your house was on fire and you're just running around the house trying to spray everything that you don't want to burn up with some type of fire retardant. Well, why don't we just put out the fire? So we like to see people fix the problem and allow that LES to close properly. So we don't use these type of situations even though they're very popular. And a lot of these formulas will try to combine some of these strategies together and say, well, this helps somebody with reflux, this helps somebody with reflux, so let's just put them all together, and obviously that's going to help everybody with reflux. We look at this formula here and they have like chamomile extract, DGL, artichoke extract, marshmallow, organic ginger. And that kind of brings us to this next category, which is prokinetics, and things that are meant to help things move through the digestive tract a little bit faster. A lot of people feel, well, if somebody's really constipated, that's going to back everything up, and if things are backed up, that's going to create like bloating situations and things can't move, so all that pressure is going to push things back up and cause reflux. And our viewpoint is that the things that cause slow motility are also the things that allow reflux to happen. It's not necessarily things backing up that's pushing it all back up. But we like to look at the underlying cause, and when you understand motility and constipation, you can see that they all have the same underlying cause in some of these circumstances. So prokinetics are things like, ginger and artichoke, and people feel like if you can move things along, it's going to help your reflux. And I found that, oh wow, it just doesn't. Not with me, not with any of my clients. But if somebody is just on the fence and they're just having a little bit of trouble, using something that might help things move along a little bit might bring them some relief. But that's only going to happen if someone's problem is very minor. The next category of supplements is going to be things that are used to improve some type of overgrowth, especially in the stomach, because if there's a bacterial overgrowth in the stomach, they can put out this alkaline kind of waste that's alkalizing that stomach even further. They also put out a lot of gases when they're fermenting things, and those gases create pressure, and that pressure pushes things back up, and now we have major reflux. So if we can get rid of that overgrowth, that can improve a lot of those problems. Some types of overgrowth, like H. pylori, are said to be able to restrict our stomach acid production. So remember, this reflux comes when there's just a small amount of acid there, but it's not enough to trigger that valve to close. So now the small amount of acid there comes back up and burns us, and we feel like, oh, I have too much acid. So that's causing my reflux because I have too much. But if there's enough acid there, it's going to trigger that. It's going to close. Too much acid, if you don't have the ability to neutralize it with other things that go on in the digestive process, is going to create a chronic diarrhea issue. It's not going to create a chronic acid reflux issue for most individuals. We'll talk about some scenarios where it can, but it's not going to do it for most people. So we look at this formula here that has a name that would equate to heartburn fixer, and we see the ingredients are orange peel extract, which is basically what's called D-limonene. And this is very good at wiping out bacteria in the stomach. It can even seep into that mucus layer a little bit and help wipe them out there. We use this a lot with people who have an overgrowth in the stomach and have acid reflux, and we find a lot of success with it. But when you buy some of these formulas, you get like 10 of them in a box and it's like $40. You can get the exact same thing for like 120 capsules for like $45 or $50. So just try not to get ripped off by buying some formula that's just marketed for reflux. You can just get D-limonene. I'll put a link in the description below for the one that we use just so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm not saying to buy this or that it's going to fix all of your reflux magically, but this can be a very important part of fixing acid reflux. If someone has an overgrowth, that needs to be taken care of or they're not going to be able to fix the problem. So wiping out an overgrowth can be a big thing, but there's also other factors that might restrict a person from making enough stomach acid properly. So if they wipe out that overgrowth, but they still can't make enough stomach acid, the small amount that they have is still going to come back up and burn them because they're not making enough to trigger that LES valve to close. So we find that these type of formulas can be very helpful as a part of the system to stop the reflux. If somebody's only problem is that they have an overgrowth, they're making stomach acid fine, but maybe the waste from that overgrowth is neutralizing all the acid they're making, then when they wipe that out, they're going to fix their reflux. It's going to be a happy day. Way to go. I just find that most people need to take more steps than that, and we'll talk about some of those in a minute. Other formulas you see might have like zinc carnosine. This can be a really helpful part of trying to wipe out like an H. pylori infection in the stomach. So you'll see a lot of acid reflux formulas that will contain zinc carnosine. I'm a fan of using zinc carnosine, but if that's all somebody's doing, they're not fixing the actual underlying cause. The next category are these Alginate Raft type therapies. And when we look at this study on review article, Alginate Raft formulations in the treatment of heartburn and acid reflux, they show that a lot of people improve their symptoms by using this method. And basically what you're doing is you're taking some type of formula that contains sodium alginate, and it comes into the stomach And these formulas will usually also contain some type of bicarbonate like sodium or potassium bicarbonate. And then when they come in and that mixes with the acid in the stomach, it creates a lot of CO2. And then the CO2 gets formed into this sodium alginate stuff, and it creates like this raft that then floats up to the top of the stomach and creates like a barrier that keeps the acid from coming back up and burning you. So with a mechanical method, I find that that's almost brilliant to come up with how that would work. Here's the problem. To make these work, you have to be putting bicarbonate, alkaline substances, into the stomach. So you're never going to fix the problem if you're continuously alkalizing the stomach and restricting its ability to acidify properly so you can break down your food, so you can keep out all the bad guys, and so you can trigger this valve to close so it won't have reflux anymore. So I feel like these can be useful in some scenarios. We'll talk about this a little bit when we get down to the hiatal hernia situation. But if someone has a really like a mechanical issue where they can't get that to close, I feel like doing this at night when somebody's sleeping could be beneficial. But with the thousands of people that I've helped improve reflux, I think that I've used this method maybe once. So it's not something we like to do because, again, you're working against your body. You're not allowing the body to work the way that it's supposed to work. Now, we like to use the type of formulas where you are actually fixing the problem. So wiping out a bacterial overgrowth, that's part of the actual problem. Using that step to get rid of that fixes one of the actual problems. But we like to actually acidify the stomach. So to acidify the stomach so that we can trigger the valve to close correctly, some people might be able to use like a shot of apple cider vinegar. That's kind of acidic and it can come in and acidify that stomach, or maybe even trigger the valve on the way in. That hey, I'm acidic right here, and that can trigger it to kind of tighten up a little bit. But I find that most people need a lot more than that. ACV is only going to give a person a little bit of a boost if that's all they need. And a lot of people, if this esophagus is really inflamed, when they take apple cider vinegar, there's going to be some cussing. It's going to feel like fire going down. So I don't use that a lot as a first step. We like to actually acidify the stomach the same way that the body would, with hydrochloric acid. So we can supplement with a supplemental form called Betaine HCL capsules. And we just take these with the meal, in the middle of the meal, and then that helps acidify the stomach correctly. But if a person doesn't know how to use this correctly, they're probably going to make their symptoms worse. If somebody just takes one capsule like the bottle's probably going to tell them to do, they're just adding a little bit of acid. Now they've increased the acid, but if it's not yet enough to trigger this valve to close, now there's going to be more acid available to come back up and burn them. My reflux got worse. I hate you. What is happening? So we really want to understand how to use this the right way. I'll have a link in the description below for our video on how much HCl should I use, and that can kind of walk you through figuring out what's going to be right for you. Also, if someone has an overgrowth there and they put HCl in there, all those gases and neutralizing acids that are coming from that overgrowth are either going to neutralize that acid, making it worthless and not effective at all those gases are really going to push that small amount of acid up even more and really magnify reflux symptoms. So we want to know how to wipe those things out before we start supplementing with Betaine HCl, and then we want to understand how to ramp that dose up correctly so that we can really acidify the stomach. And in that video that I just pointed you to, I share some studies that walk through how they've done that and really found success by acidifying a stomach that was not being acidified correctly. You also want to make sure that you're not getting an HCl that contains pepsin. Pepsin is very helpful in breaking down protein. It's something that the body really uses. But all these companies put pepsin in their HCl. And most people need to work up to 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of these capsules. And that much pepsin will often create a lot of discomfort. And then the person thinks, oh, this isn't for me, man. I don't need this HCl. It's really all that pepsin that's creating a lot of discomfort. So we'll put a link in the description below to the one that we use without pepsin, just because sometimes those are difficult to find. Now, what we want to look at is that there's also a lot of common mistakes that are in these formulas or that people make when they're using these formulas. One of the biggest mistakes is that a lot of people will say, well, digestive enzymes will help you fix reflux. And digestive enzymes are very important here to help us really break that food down correctly, but it's not usually going to be enough to fix the problem. And people will get some kind of formula that has like digestive enzymes and maybe some zinc carnosine and a really small amount of HCl, because even the formula maker understands we need to acidify the stomach to turn it off, But since they put such a small amount, it's not enough to really acidify the stomach. Now they're just increasing that amount that's going to come back up, and the person's reflux gets worse, and they're like, oh, I'm going to give you a horrible review and get rid of this. They're just not using it correctly. Digestive enzymes can be great if you're also acidifying the stomach enough to trigger that valve to close. And a lot of people can't make enough stomach acid because the body doesn't have the resources to do that. So if you can supplement with the HCl for long enough to help the body start breaking down your food correctly, access the nutrients that are in that food, now the body will have the resources it needs and you don't need to supplement with as much. Another mistake formula is somebody will say, hey, let's just use some omega-3s to get rid of this inflammation. And I find that that's not successful unless you can fix the reflux. You're not going to fix inflammation if the fire is on the whole time. So omega-3s are not going to do anything to improve that. People will also say, oh, if you use probiotics, that will fix your reflux. You're going to get this good gut flora and get a good microbiome, and that's going to help your digestion. Well, for a lot of people, when you put good bacteria in, they're going to battle with some type of overgrowth in the stomach or the small intestine and really magnify those symptoms. So we're a big fan of probiotics. We use those, but we use them after we've reduced an overgrowth. I'll have a video in the description below about when should I use probiotics that can kind of walk you through that process. But that's a very common mistake that I see with a lot of these acid reflux formulas. Now, one issue that can keep all these things from working is if somebody has a hiatal hernia where part of the stomach is kind of pulled up through the diaphragm. And now that LES valve is kind of jacked up and it can't close correctly even if you do acidify the stomach. So they'll try to acidify the stomach and now even more acid is coming back up because this hernia is restricting that from closing correctly. So I'll have a link in the description below for our video on how to fix a hiatal hernia. That was part of the problem that I was dealing with when I had my reflux issues. So that can be important to understand. If you don't fix that and that's a problem for you, you're going to have a hard time really getting rid of this for good. So you can see that a lot of these formulas are taking pieces that actually can be effective for some people, whether that's zinc carnosine to help get rid of an overgrowth or some type of D-limonene, or a lot of people will use mastic gum. That's another thing that's really good at wiping out bacteria in the stomach and small intestine, and some people will just say, here, use mastic gum to fix your reflux. But again, when you're not looking at all the factors of can I even make stomach acid, is my valve able to close, or do I have a hiatal hernia, then some of these things are just not going to work for most people. But you can see that if you're just addressing part of this, a lot of people are not going to find success. I had to fix my hernia, I had to get rid of an overgrowth, I had some other issues going on that had to be corrected to really fix my reflux. I've talked about those in a lot of other videos, but when we look at the formulas, what we want to understand is, do I need to wipe out an overgrowth? Do I need to acidify the stomach correctly? And do I really just want to relieve symptoms but prolong the problem indefinitely? You might want to do that. You might not want to put in the effort. To really fix this can take effort for some people. But if you get stuck, we'll have a link to our totally free digestion course in the description below, and that totally free course can kind of walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly and what steps do I need to take to improve those. Now, if you've been battling this reflux issue for a long time and not able to really get rid of it, you can jump over now and check out our video on the hidden reasons your reflux won't stay gone. I can't wait to hear about your results.